Our meeting will come to order. The committee today is meeting to hear testimony on the posture of the U.S. Strategic Command, and we welcome our witness, General Hyten, Commander of Stratcom. The Trump administration's national defense strategy prioritizes and re-emergence of long-term strategic competition. Nowhere is this reality more evident than in Russia and China, intensifying their efforts in the nuclear, cyber, and space domain, which are focus of a strategic command mission. The Nuclear Posture Review, released last month, orients our nuclear enterprise to address these strategic competitors. The NPR offers continuity in the U.S. nuclear modernization efforts and wisely advocates developing additional capabilities to achieve our fundamental goal of nuclear deterrence. Our potential adversaries are not standing still. In his recent State of the Nation address, Putin unveiled new nuclear weapons, including heavy mobile ICBMs and hypersonic glide vehicles. Meanwhile, Russia's continued violations of both the INF and the Open Skies treaties threaten to undermine strategic stability. Then there's China. China is rapidly expanding its missile forces, including development of new ICBM capabilities and advanced ballistic missile submarines. It recently developed a new nuclear-capable strategic bomb, achieving a nuclear triad for China. Beyond our strategic competitors, threats from North Korea and Iran persist. In particular, recent North Korean missile tests suggest that they are capable of striking the homeland with ICBM. I would say I'm more optimistic now about North Korea than I was just a short while ago. I think our response to North Korea's threat was one that actually produced some good results. So I think that right now I really believe that the meeting is going to take place with Kim Jong-un and our president. Russia and China are also increasingly active in space, intent on challenging our domain superiority to achieve an asymmetric advantage. Both countries invested significant resources in anti-satellite, ISR, direct energy, jamming, and cyber capabilities. We've got to do more to meet these challenges. Thank you for being here, General Hyten. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and General Hyten. Thank you for your service to the country and for testifying on the posture of the United States Strategic Command as we prepare for the fiscal year 2019 National Defense Authorization Act. I would like to hear from you about a number of topics based on your office call with me last week. Thank you again for making time. First and foremost is the administration's Nuclear Posture Review. It adopts many of the same premises as the 2010 Posture Review, that we will not use nuclear weapons against nations in good standing under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, but we always reserve the right in cases of extreme circumstance to use nuclear weapons. It affirms the importance of non-proliferation, but places an emphasis on the changed threat conditions that exist today versus 2010. It reaffirms the importance of the 2010 review on modernizing the triad of delivery platforms and weapons and their nuclear command, control, and communication, or NC3 systems. But it also proposes two supplemental systems, a low-yield submarine-launched ballistic missile and a sea-based cruise missile, which was dropped in the 2010 posture review because it was not being deployed and maintained. I'm referring to the sea-based cruise missile. While I agree with much of the NPR, I have concerns about the low-yield submarine-launched warhead. It's my understanding that this system is in response to Russia's military doctrine of using a small-yield nuclear weapon as a means to escalate to de-escalate or escalate to win a conventional conflict. The Russian doctrine of escalate to de-escalate could easily spin out of control if our response to their low-yield weapon is to use a similar one, which could escalate into exchange of larger weapons. We have to devote considerable effort to wargaming this problem and ensure that existing systems, both conventional and nuclear, cannot meet this doctrinal challenge of escalate to de-escalate. In any case, such a proposal certainly opens up a debate of deeply held opinions. While this debate may be important to have, I think it is important to have indeed, I worry that it may disrupt the bipartisan consensus that presently ensures the modernization of the triad and NC3 system. This process will take decades, and I believe it should be our highest priority and sole focus. Beyond the nuclear mission, General, you also have an increasingly important space mission. I realize much of this is classified, but it is imperative that you communicate in an appropriate format what this budget request proposes and how it addresses the threats we face. You are also responsible for synchronizing global missile defense plans and operations. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the state of our homeland and regional systems, how we need to improve reliability and address advancing threats. Your command is also responsible for spectrum operations and electronic warfare. I'd like to know what your command has been advocating for to make this an integrated effort across the Department of Defense. Strategic Command, as its name implies, is about deterrence with near-peer competitors. Today, deterrence is a seamless continuum between land, sea, air, electronic spectrum, and space. You have many issues on your plate, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. General Hyten, you are recognized for an opening statement, and your entire statement will be made a part of the record.
Thank you, Senator Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today and a continuing privilege for me to represent the 184,000 Americans, the 184,000 men and women performing the missions of U.S. Strategic Command every day. I want to start by thanking you for your enduring support to our nation's defense. As we sit here today, it's important to note that the appropriations bill funding our military is still awaiting full approval by the Congress. Passage of this bill is essential in ensuring our department maintains the ability to field the most lethal, capable, and resilient military in the world. I remain optimistic that Congress will pass this bill as the existing continuing resolution expires this Friday. Reliance on continuing resolutions in lieu of stable budgets delays mission-critical modernization, degrades troop morale, and impedes readiness recovery. But I am grateful for this committee's continued support. But timely budgets are essential in order to ensure our all-volunteer force remains fully trained and equipped to address the nation's existing and emerging future threats. The first most important message I want to deliver today is that the forces under my command are fully ready to deter our adversaries and respond decisively should deterrence ever fail. We are ready for all threats. No one should doubt this. We just have to make sure that the future Stratcom commanders that come after me will always be able to make this statement. Stratcom is a global warfighting command. We set the conditions across the globe as the ultimate guarantor of our national and allied security. Our forces and capabilities underpin and enable all other joint force operations. Stratcom forces are dispersed across the globe, under the sea, on the land, under the land, in the air, across cyber, and into space. The men and women of this command are responsible for strategic deterrence, nuclear operations, space operations, joint electromagnetic spectrum operations, global strike, missile defense, analysis and targeting, and still cyberspace operations until Cyber Command is elevated. Today, our country is challenged by multiple adversaries with an expanding range of capabilities available to them. To maintain military superiority in this multipolar, all-domain world, we must outthink, outmaneuver, outpartner, and out-innovate our adversaries. Deterrence in the 21st century requires the integration of all our capabilities across all domains, enabling us to respond to adversary aggression anytime, anywhere. The bedrock of our nation's deterrence continues to be our safe, secure, ready, and reliable nuclear triad. The surest way to prevent war is to be prepared for it. And while the current triad continues to provide the backbone of our national security, will eventually consume the last remaining margin from our investments made during the Cold War, and our modernization programs are critical and include the B-21 bomber, the Columbia-class ballistic missile submarine, the ground-based strategic deterrent, the long-range standoff cruise missile, nuclear command and control, and life-extended nuclear warheads, which will provide without a doubt the nuclear deterrent capability our nation needs now and well into the future. The recently completed 2018 Nuclear Posture Review reinforces and clearly defines long-standing national objectives regarding nuclear weapons. From a warfighter perspective, there is important consistency between the 2018 NPR and its predecessor. The biggest difference, as with the recent National Defense Strategy, is the return to threat-based planning and response to great power competition. We started the NPR with assessment of the threat. It was all about the threat, and based our approach on what our adversaries are doing today and the increasing challenges of the future. We have to remember the strategic environment is dynamic. It changes constantly. And our approach to deterrence must be equally dynamic to address these evolving threats. Stratcom truly is a global warfighting command, and the strength of its command is its people. The soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, civilians of this enterprise have the most important mission in our entire department, in our entire nation. Their hard work and dedication assures our nation's strategic capabilities remain safe, secure, reliable, and ready. Sustained congressional support will ensure we remain ready, agile, and effective in deterring strategic attack, assuring our allies and partners well today and into the future. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. When a quorum is present, we are going to shift over and do some confirmations, the brief interruptions. As you heard in the opening statements from both Senator Reid and myself, there is a little difference of opinion in terms of low-yield capabilities. Both China and Russia have a robust nuclear arsenal and a triad of delivery systems, as you've said in your opening statement. And I think that China and Russia are identified a little differently than the rest of the threats. I think General Dunford said it the best way. He said, we're losing our qualitative and quantitative edge. The 2018 Nuclear Posture Review calls for the development of a low-yield nuclear weapon in the range of approximately 10 kilotons to counter Russia's tactical nuclear weapons not controlled by the New START. Now, when you talk about 10 kilotons, sometimes we have to remember, what is a kiloton? And I think Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. The Minuteman III is around 300, 350 kilotons. So you're talking about a capability that is not there right now. The New START limits both the United States and Russia to 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear weapons. It's been stated policy that since early 2000s that Putin could use a nuclear weapon in a conventional fight to, in using his words, escalate to de-escalate the conflict by using a tactical nuclear weapon to halt hostilities. Now, I know that some worry that this might lead to increased nuclear proliferation, but I'd kind of like to hear from you what your thoughts are. And this is a part of the posture review right now. Do you think we ought to have a low-yield capability? Mike?
Sir, I strongly agree with the need for a low-yield nuclear weapon. That capability is a deterrence weapon to respond to the threat that Russia in particular is portraying. President Putin announced as far back as April of 2000 that the Russian doctrine will be to use a low-yield nuclear weapon on the battlefield in case of a conventional overmatch with an adversary.
And I would say that if we don't have one, the only thing we could do if we were to use a response would be a larger one. It'd be so in terms of kilotons.
So two elements in that is Henry Kissinger, recently said that if you don't have the right response, you could put the United States in a position where the two choices for the president would be surrender or suicide. Suicide if you escalate too high and the escalation comes back at you. Surrender if you don't have the ability to respond.
Yes.
We do have low-yield nuclear weapons in our arsenal. They're with our aviation capabilities right now. But those aviation capabilities may not be the right response in terms of timeliness and survivability to get to where the threat is. Therefore, to respond to the threat, we need a small number of low-yield nuclear weapons that we can deploy on our submarine-launched ballistic missiles, still in the New START limits.
Yeah, and I remember the conversation we had when Kissinger was here on that. We talk a lot about the hypersonic threats that are out there. Let's start off by, give me a definition of a hypersonic threat.
A hypersonic threat is a system that starts out ballistic, and so you'll see it like a ballistic missile, but then it depresses the trajectory and then flies more like a cruise missile or an airplane. So it goes up into the low reaches of space and then turns immediately back down and then levels out and flies at a very high level of speed. That's hypersonic. That's a hypersonic weapon.
Do both or either Russia or China have the hypersonic threat capability?
Both Russia and China are developing hypersonic capabilities. We've watched them test those capabilities. So both Russia and China are aggressively pursuing hypersonic capabilities.
If that happens, what kind of defense do we have against hypersonic? Right?
We have a very difficult, well, our defense is our deterrent capability. We don't have any defense that could deny the employment of such a weapon against us. So our response would be our deterrent force, which would be the triad and the nuclear capabilities that we have to respond to such a threat.
And then back to the triad, the capability that we would have with ours, when I talk to people back home who are not really into these issues, but they've heard of the B-52 and how old it is today, and to use that on for the length of time that we anticipate we would have to use that before we're able to replace that. What do you think in terms of the age of the three elements of our triad and their capability relative to those of China and Russia?
So as you look across our force, you start with the B-52, such an amazing airplane. The designers of the airplane were geniuses way before their time. But it is basically a truck to carry weapons. It is not a penetrating bomber. It will never be a penetrating bomber. A penetrating bomber will be the B-21. We only have a small number of B-2s. We need a larger number of penetrating bombers. That will be the B-21. We'll need a new weapon to go on the B-52. We'll need the long-range standoff weapon. I'm concerned about our ICBM force about the 2030 timeframe and beyond. We replaced the propulsion, the guidance, the electronics on that system 15 years ago or so, and by 2030, all of those capabilities will have aged out. We did a detailed analysis that said the smartest thing we can do is just buy new this time instead of trying to replace all the components. We'll have to do that. The Ohio-class submarine, at a certain point, it will not go down under the water anymore. We need a new submarine to replace that, and we need new command and control, and we need new weapons as well. All those things come to fruition in the 2030s.
Yes. Thank you, General Hyten. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, General, I think there's a very serious debate about the new proposed systems, particularly the low-yield submarine-launched ballistic missile. We have, as you've indicated in your testimony, we have systems that are even lower yield than the one we're proposing today. They're generally airborne, I believe, platform launched by an aircraft. One of the things, and we talked about this, is there will be, my sense, a reaction and reaction. This will be a dynamic process. If there is a conventional attack, I don't think we'll sit back and wait till they threaten to use a nuclear device. We'll start positioning our resources immediately. And some of those resources will be low-yield nuclear weapons as a deterrent to their use of weapons. In that context, why can't we use something like the long-range standoff weapon as a deterrent to the use of a small nuke by the Russians? Your microphone, sir.
Yeah, the answer is basically the reason we have a triad. We have a triad to respond to the different elements of the threat that Russia brings to bear. Russia is going to have, in the unclassified world, at least 11 different delivery platforms for a low-yield nuclear weapon that they can use in different places and different times. Right now we have one, and that's an airplane. The airplane can be positioned in the right place in order to respond to that kind of threat, but an airplane is also difficult. It has to fight through a denied environment. It has to work in different areas. As we work through the various gaming of the responses that the Russians may have to those capabilities, we felt strongly that we needed another delivery option. So a small number of low-yield nuclear weapons on the submarine-launched ballistic missile, still under the 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear weapons under the START Treaty. In other words, we'll take a big weapon out of a submarine and put a small weapon back in. Still the same kind of structure. We believe that'll give future adversaries significant pause before they act.
Well, again, I think the whole issue, and you put your finger on it, is deterrence. And the flip side of that is that even if we have these new systems, if they make, I think, the extraordinary error of using a nuclear device, we respond. There is at least the option on the other side, as you point out, they have multiple launching devices and multiple nuclear warheads, is to maybe try a second one, which we try a second one, and again, we get into this nuclear escalation scenario, which I think we're concerned about. And this is an issue I'd like to say, I think it's a point we have to really think very, very clearly about and share with you your thoughts and the gaming that you've done and the analysis you've done to see, again, for the public to vet this. And so I look forward to doing that with you. One of the other proposals is the sea-based nuclear cruise missile. And as you know, in 2010, the prior NPR canceled the submarine-based cruise missile because the Navy literally had it in storage, and NNSA was not modernizing its warhead, so it seemed to be sort of obsolete in effect. We've got some criticism of our colleagues, our allies, the Koreans and the Japanese, the South Koreans and Japanese, because they see this as a very effective extended deterrent. Can you just state the military requirement now for bringing back this system?
Yes, sir. The threat is from both Russia and China that drives the need for the sea-launched cruise missile. We haven't made a decision yet about how to base that, whether it's on a surface ship or a submarine. We'll look at that. Part of the 19 budget request is to start down that process and decide what the best basing for that would be. I can tell you the details in a classified session of why we believe the threat demands it, but I can tell you the threat is clear, and I believe we need that to respond to the threat that is there.
Thank you, sir. Just a final question is that we mutually rely upon NNSA to create the nuclear pits and all the other basic components of our nuclear missile response. Back in your predecessor, General Keller, indicated that he had some doubts about the ability of NSA to do this, given the ongoing debate about whether production would be in Los Alamos or elsewhere, or what kind of production, the big box or the small box. Do you share those concerns?
Well, I still have concerns. Those concerns have not gone away. However, you should know that the director of NNSA, Lisa Gordon-Haggerty, the first day that she took the oath, the first call she made was to me to commit that NNSA and the Department of Energy was fully on to deliver the capabilities that we need. As a Stratcom commander, my requirement for a future capability is that we need to build to 80 plutonium pits by 2030 in order to build out the nuclear weapons profile. I think that's been well studied, understood. We can talk about that further later if you desire, but I still am concerned because the infrastructure is challenged. But the current leadership and DOE has made a commitment to me that they will go after that. I guess the concern that I have left over is we don't have a lot of margin there. And anytime we don't have margin, I'm concerned.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
President, I ask the committee to consider a list of. I ask the committee to consider a list of 2,901 pending military nominations. All of these nominations have been before the committee the required length of time. Is there a motion to favorably report this list of 2,901 pending military motions to the Senate?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. Motion carries. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for your service to this country, and I thank you for representing the men and women under your leadership. The NPR states, quote, if Russia returns to compliance with its arms control obligation, reduces its non-strategic nuclear arsenal, and corrects its other destabilizing behaviors, the United States may reconsider the pursuit of an SLCM, end quote. However, in the debate, this statement has lost some of its nuance, and some now describe the SLCM as purely a chip to bargain for Russia's return to compliance with the INF Treaty. Can you clarify this? And if Russia returned to compliance with the INF Treaty and otherwise maintained its current course with respect to non-strategic nuclear weapons, would it be your best military advice to cancel the deployment of the SLCM?
So, Senator, I agree with my boss, Secretary Mattis. I don't like the term bargaining chip. The capabilities that we propose in the nuclear posture review are in response to the threat. Everything that we talked about, including the low-yield nuclear weapon and the sea-launched cruise missile, are in response to a threat. If that threat changes, then my military advice will change. But if that threat doesn't change, my military advice will stay that we need those capabilities in order to respond to the threat. I'm not a diplomat. I'm not a politician. Diplomats need to work those issues with our adversaries. I hope that they do. But my job as a military officer is to look at the threat, understand the threat, and propose capabilities to this body to deliver to the military so we can respond to any threat that exists. It's all about the threat.
And while we're on the topic of Russia's violations of the INF Treaty, your opening statement reads, quote, Russia's violation of the treaty with the development of the SSC-8 ground-launched cruise missile remains a significant issue as delivery of the treaty-violating system continues. And when you say delivery of the treaty-violating system continues, do you mean that Russia is continuing to produce and deploy the illegal system in greater numbers?
Yes, ma'am.
Since the NPR's release, some, the Russian government in particular, deny that Russia genuinely has an escalate to de-escalate strategy. And I think you were questioned by a member of the Russian embassy staff on this point during a speech that you gave last month. Do you agree with the NPR's assessment that the escalate to de-escalate strategy reflects that Russian doctrine?
I guess I'll say that I watch very closely what President Putin says, and I watch very closely what the Russian military does in response. And President Putin, in April of 2000, almost 18 years ago, President Putin said that the doctrine of Russia will be to use nuclear weapons on the battlefield in a conventional scenario. And that has been the continuing doctrine of Russia for almost 18 years. This is nothing new. We need the ability to effectively respond to that. We need the ability to deter that. We don't want that to ever happen. There's no such thing as a tactical nuclear weapon, in my opinion. There's no such thing as a conventional nuclear weapon. All nuclear weapons are strategic, but you need different kinds to respond to different threats.
And would you agree that when we are looking at this continuous threat of a Russian doctrine to escalate, to de-escalate, that's based on the talk of their senior leaders? It is based on the fact that they are building weapons that are designed for this purpose, and that they do conduct training exercises?
There is no doubt that they do all of those things. And when I have my intel, I don't speak Russian, but when I have my intel action translate the Russian for me, it does not escalate to de-escalate. It's escalate to win. It's escalate to win on the battlefield. And we have to deter that kind of response. That cannot be allowed.
General, critics have made a variety of arguments against the deployment of that low-yield ballistic missile warhead on a submarine. In some, they believe the system is impractical because any use of the weapon would enable the submarine to be detected, destroyed, and they believe would initiate a full-scale nuclear war. Can you speak to those arguments, sir?
Those arguments are not true, ma'am. I can tell you in the classified forum how a submarine would survive after launching. I can tell you how the Russians would see it. I can tell you how they would respond to that. I can also tell you that from a U.S. perspective, when we see a launch of a missile, we can characterize that threat. We understand where it is, where it's going, and unless it's a massive attack from Russia, any other scenario, there's actually a lot of time to respond, a lot of time to characterize, and it will be the same way on the Russian side. So each of those arguments are false. It's better to discuss the answers in the classified session.
Thank you, sir, for addressing these immense threats that we face.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Nelson.
Good morning, General. I'm not too keen on ripping space out of the Air Force and creating a Space Corps. You want to state your position for the record?
So I think I've stated my position many times. I think that someday we'll have a Space Corps or a Space Force in this country. But I don't think the time is right for that right now. But I love the fact that the President talked about space as a warfighting domain. I love the fact that he embraces the fact that we need to have a future that looks at this warfighting domain. I'm a big supporter of the bill that was passed by Congress last year in the National Defense Authorization Act that talks about looking at a Space Force and looking at when that would be the right time and what elements would be in place. I think the best example is the budget. The budget that was submitted this year is an 18% increase in space, looking at warfighting. We're going to get after those pieces. And so both the President and the Vice President and the members of this Congress, everybody's aligned with the threat. That's exactly where it should be, Senator. Thank you.
So you gave a speech back in December that the days of viewing space as a benign environment are clearly behind us, and we need to maintain our lethal edge in space. And you've said continually since then that in order to maintain the edge, we have to move faster. Do you think this is happening?
I see good signs. The good signs I see is the leadership in the department right now. Secretary Mattis, Secretary Shanahan, Lord, Mike Griffin in R&E. I see leadership in the Air Force and in AQ that all believe in going fast. I think the budget lays the groundwork for going fast, but Senator, we haven't done it yet.
Right.
We haven't done any of that yet. We haven't proven to anybody that we can go fast again. We used to be able to do that. We need to be able to do it again. We can do it again, but we have to get out of our own way. But I'm excited about the leadership in the department that has been put in place to help lead that change.
General, I dare to touch the politically sensitive topic of the JCPOA. If the president were to unilaterally withdraw, what kind of impact is that going to have on our global security environment?
So my job, Senator, is to look at that treaty, look at what it does to our overall strategic deterrent, work with the intelligence community as well as the broader interagency to evaluate whether Iran is in compliance with JCPOA. And as I sit here today, Iran is in compliance with JCPOA. But JCPOA is about nuclear. And from a command that is nuclear, that's an important piece to me because it allows me to understand the nuclear environment better. But it doesn't say anything about Iran as a global sponsor of terrorism or as Iran as building huge numbers of ballistic missiles that threaten their neighbors and potentially us someday. All of those will be the decision that a policymaker has to make. But my job is to look at the nuclear capabilities and make that recommendation, which I've done.
If we were to pull out of the JCPOA, does that send a message to Korea, North Korea?
Any action the United States makes sends a message to everybody on the planet. So it will send a message to North Korea. It'll send a message to Russia, China, our allies, Iran, Saudi Arabia. Everybody is impacted. That's one of the differences in deterrence in the 21st century is that it's no longer a single country problem and a single issue problem. It impacts everybody. So every decision has to be considered in concert with the entire global environment.
General, you already discussed in detail the threat of the hypersonics. Your answer was that we need this submarine-based low-yield nuclear capability. Is that the deterrent to hypersonics, not only from Russia but and also China?
So that's where we stand today. But I believe we need to pursue improved sensor capabilities to be able to track, characterize, and attribute the threats wherever they come from. And right now we have a challenge with that with our current on-orbit space architecture and the limited number of radars that we have around the world. In order to see those threats, I believe we need a new space sensor architecture. The Missile Defense Agency and the Air Force are looking into that right now. There's $42 million in the FY19 budget in the Air Force line to look at that alongside of MDA as a prototype. I'm going to advocate, as I've advocated for the last 30 years, that we need to move into space and be able to build sensors to conduct both the characterization of these new threats that are appearing as well as discriminate better and earlier the mid-course element of the threat that exists today.
Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I'll just say I'm sure that General Hyten lays awake at night after he has prepared all of this infrastructure up in space to protect us, and then he sees the threat of cyber attacks on that infrastructure, that must keep you awake at night, General.
All the threats keep me awake at night, sir. I wish they didn't.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nelson. Senator Cotton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for testifying once again in front of our committee. I want to return to something you said a few moments ago. You mentioned that Vladimir Putin first started talking about the use of nuclear weapons on the battlefield 18 years ago. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I think it's worth going through that entire history because it goes across multiple administrations. It really talks about where Russia has been for the last 18 years. In 2000, April of 2000, he announced that the new doctrine of use of low-yield nuclear weapons on a battlefield was part of the Russian doctrine. He also announced a 50% increase that year in the budget for nuclear capabilities. 6 years later, he announced that Russia was going to modernize their entire nuclear arsenal and build new weapons, and they're going to be 70% done by 2020. Dmitry Rogozin in 2015 came out and said, we're not going to get 70% done, we're going to get 100% done by 2020. This has been a continuing pattern of behavior that creates a threat to the United States that we have to respond to. That is the work that we've been doing, and that's what the Nuclear Posture Review does. And I think it's a very measured response to the threat that has been presented to us, much more measured than the speech Vladimir Putin gave on the 1st of March.
It's often perceived that Vladimir Putin and his senior general staff's rhetoric on this is a response to U.S. actions, especially post 2014 and their Crimea invasion. But what you're saying is that he first started raising this in less than a year after he had taken over leadership in Russia.
Almost immediately upon his first election in 2000, he made this.
I think that's very telling. Now, sometimes talk is cheap with politicians, but when that talk is backed up by a substantial commitment of national resources, you can usually credit it. Would you say that Russia has engaged in a substantial commitment of their national resources to modernize their nuclear force over these last 18 years?
An enormous commitment of their national treasure.
And that threat is primarily driving the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review for our country.
I think the Nuclear Posture Review is very consistent with previous, but it addresses the threat specifically.
Let me ask you this broad question about it before we get into any details. So we've been doing nuclear posture reviews for a while. We've been a nuclear power for 73 years. Is there a single operating concept or capability in the 2018 nuclear posture review that is truly innovative or not reflective of 73 years of tradition in this country?
It's all consistent with what we've been looking at from nuclear capabilities really since the beginning of the nuclear age in August of 1945.
Okay, so let's now be specific on a few points. First, it's been this country's position for 73 years that we would not forswear the first use of nuclear weapons. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it remains so today.
And it remains so today.
Second, we've talked some about the low-yield submarine-launched warhead. While that specific capability may not have existed to this point on a submarine, as you've testified before, we've had lots of other low-yield weapons, and we continue to have low-yield air-launched or bomb warheads, correct?
And we used to have low-yield submarine-launched weapons, too. As I think Senator Inhofe talked about, we didn't maintain those going into the previous nuclear posture review, and so in 2010,
Is that low-yield submarine-launched, or is that sea-launched cruise missiles?
It was low-yield submarine-launched at that time.
But we've also had sea-launched cruise missiles before.
We've had sea-launched cruise missiles before. None of those capabilities are new. They're reintroducing previous capabilities that we felt were needed to deter our adversaries, and we believe we need to deter those adversaries again.
And again, driven primarily by the threat that Russia's posed by both the rhetoric and the reality of their nuclear modernization. As you've testified today, not just in the last year, not just in the last 9 years, but going back 18 years across 3 prior administrations, the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, and the Obama administration.
And it's also, that's true, but it's also important to add China and North Korea into that equation because they drive the threat as well.
I think that's an important point. Almost all strategic discussions, certainly strategic arms control negotiations, revolve around the bilateral threat between the United States and Russia. China is rapidly modernizing its nuclear forces. Much of that happens in a very clandestine fashion. So it's hard to say just how dire that threat has become. Certainly when you add Russia and China together, we do face the potential threat of nuclear overmatch in the future. And I have to say, we don't have a good history of estimating nuclear weapons programs. We usually, in the last 73 years, have gotten it wrong when you look at countries like the Soviet Union, like China, like India, like Pakistan, and erred on the side of caution, saying that it would take them longer to develop those threats. So I think it's very important what you're doing at Strategic Command, what the entire administration has done with this new nuclear posture review to counteract those threats that we face and to keep this country safe from ever having to face a nuclear war. And the best way to do that is to have nuclear overmatch against all of our adversaries. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Hyten, thank you for being here and for your constant vigilance. I want to go back just quickly to a question that Senator Nelson posed about Iran's nuclear capabilities, and recognizing that you're looking at it only from the nuclear perspective, and I share your concern about their other destabilizing activities. But in your assessment, aren't we better off with an Iran that does not have nuclear weapons than we would be with an Iran that does have nuclear weapons?
I'd prefer nobody had nuclear weapons. That would make my job a whole lot easier.
I certainly agree with that, but on the issue of Iran.
But I would prefer Iran without nuclear weapons. Absolutely. I prefer Korea without nuclear weapons.
Thank you.
I don't think nuclear weapons will ever go away, but if we have that, I believe in nonproliferation, and the more nuclear weapons proliferate, the more difficult the world is.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to something you said at a hearing in 2017 when you were before this committee, because I asked you about cyber efforts and specifically whether you think we have a strategy that incorporates both defensive and offensive strategy with respect to cyber attacks. And I wonder if you can discuss whether we've made any progress since that hearing in 2017 on these issues.
So, ma'am, we have made progress.
Can you talk a little bit about what that is?
We've made progress in moving forward and taking the fight to the adversary that's in the Middle East right now. But in my opinion, we've not gone nearly far enough. I think we have to go much further in treating cyberspace as an operational domain, similar to the discussion we were having earlier about space as a warfighting domain. Cyberspace needs to be looked at as a warfighting domain. And if somebody threatens us in cyberspace, we need to have the authorities to respond. I always find it odd that we'll give young soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, lethal authority to operate far from home in harm's way, to apply lethal force against an adversary using a set of rules of engagement, but will hesitate to give a four-star admiral the authority to conduct cyberspace operations because we're concerned he won't follow the rules of engagement. We need to have specific rules of engagement in cyber that match the other domains that we operate in, but then we need to delegate that authority all the way down so we can deal with threats that exist that challenge the United States.
Well, I agree with that. So what do we need to do in Congress to make that happen? Do we need to give you express legislative authority? Do we need to delineate who's got those authorities?
I always hesitate to advise Congress on what you should do. That's your responsibility. But I'll tell you, when I look at it, what would be helpful to me is statements like we've had the last 2 years in space, where space is a warfighting domain, and we need to develop responses to warfighting domain. What that has done is it allowed us to push the envelope inside the department. We're not there yet. We're going to be coming back in space with a number of different things about declassification of certain capabilities, additional authorities, those kind of things. But stating it's a warfighting domain, similar to land, sea, and air, was a huge step forward for us to move forward. I think we need similar things in cyberspace.
Well, doesn't, to some degree, the nuclear posture review do that? Because it suggests that a response to a massive cyber attack might be the use of nuclear force. I mean, I don't agree with that, but it does sort of lay that out, that that's a potential response.
I think it's clear that you can have catastrophic attacks on the United States through space or cyber, and that we need to have the ability to respond to that at a means of our choosing, in a domain of our choosing. You know, people always ask me in space and cyber, how do you deter in cyber? How do you deter in space? How do you fight and win a war in space or cyber? You don't. War, conflict, deterrence is against an adversary, not against a place. You have to take the place out of it and focus on the adversary. What is the adversary doing? How do I deter that adversary? That's the piece that we have to go down, focusing back on an adversary. And that's what you see in the nuclear posture review, focusing on adversary threats. How do we respond to that? And then hopefully that allows room for our diplomats to sit down with our adversaries and say, is this the world you really want to live in?
Well, thank you. I'm out of time, but can I just ask one more question, Mr. Chairman? You talked about the progress, so to speak, that Russia has made in nuclear weapons in their military might. And this is a country with an economy that I think is about the size of Italy, that has been under sanctions for a number of years since they invaded Ukraine, and that has done all of this military buildup despite those things. So what are they doing right to allow them to do this, and what lessons can we take from that?
Well, right is in the eye of the beholder.
Right. You're right, and I don't really mean to say right, but what have they done to be successful in this arena?
So they've decided that that's the most important investment they have to make as a nation, and they've put the vast majority of the resources they have left into that. Oh, by the way, North Korea has done the same thing. That's a prioritization in Russia and North Korea.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, first of all, thank you for your service to our country, and thanks for the opportunity to visit with you today on some of these key issues. I'd like to follow up a little bit with where Senator Shaheen was going. I want to talk about our policy versus the policies of our near-peer competitors. Let's just start out with the treaties that we have in place right now. With regard to INF, are we in compliance with the INF today?
We are in compliance with the INF today.
Would you say that Russia is in compliance with the INF today?
They are not.
Would you say that we have not only Russia to be concerned with regard to similar weapons, but also a near-peer competitor in China as well?
I agree that all weapons have to be looked at on the global perspective.
Do you see any limitations on China with regard to the INF?
They do not have any limitations, the INF, and they've built significant numbers of intermediate range ballistic missiles that, if they were in the INF, they would be contrary to that treaty.
So with regard to our near-peer competitors, we have a deal with Russia. We don't have a deal with China. We're bound by the deal with Russia. We're honoring it. They're not. China, on the other hand, has no obligations to comply with it, and so they're free to move forward with their weapons development and deployment in place. Fair to say that that puts us at a competitive disadvantage, similar to having one hand tied behind our back?
I think Admiral Harris testified to a similar thing the other day. It makes his job much more difficult, but I think you have to look at there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to deterrence. There's no one-size-fits-all. You have to look at all the adversaries separately, and then you look at the impacts of any decision with those adversaries. I believe that we're better off if Russia would come in compliance with the INF, and we would be in compliance with the INF in the overall scheme of the world. However, we have to make a decision in the near term. If they don't come in compliance with the INF, how long will we continue to, as you said, tie our hands?
And I think that's being recognized in your posture position at this time. Let me go on from there, because what we've talked about now, we've discussed the triad, the air, land, and the sea. I think you made a very clear statement about both cyber and also about space. With regard to cyber, do you believe that our near-peer competitors in cyber, that they have the same identification of what the norms are with regard to how we operate in cyberspace as we do?
No, sir, they do not.
In other words, if I could shortcut it a little bit, they don't see any problem with attacking us in cyberspace today, while we probably don't take as active a role in attacking their infrastructures as they do in attacking our infrastructures today?
I think that the restrictions on Russia and China in particular are much less than the restrictions we put on ourselves.
And that's a policy decision on our part, is it not?
That is a policy decision on our part.
What about with regard to space? Clearly, any one of our weapon systems right now is dependent upon our ability to see and to hear and to monitor what other people are doing. Do they have the same norms with regards to operations in space as we do?
There are no such things as norms of behavior in space.
So are they
for
more
anybody.
aggressive with regard to the deployment of militarily designed or weapons or systems that are designed with military purposes as we are?
So I don't want to talk about that in an unclassified session. I'd be glad in a classified form to go into details of what they're doing, but all I can tell you is that they are being very aggressive in establishing what they perceive as norms that we see that I can't talk about in here at the current time.
Would it be fair to say that the eyes and ears that we have in space are at risk today from our near-peer competitors?
Today, they are not at risk, but I'm concerned in the near term they would be at risk. Today, we have such an enormous capacity that the capabilities that our adversaries are building can't challenge it just because of the sheer capacity that we have. But in the not-too-distant future, they're going to build the capabilities that will allow them to challenge that across the board, and we have to make sure we stay ahead of that threat.
Let me go to one other line of questioning for just a minute. The Air Force has recently announced that it plans to retire the B-2 by the early 2030s, sustain the B-52 through 2050, and move forward with procurement of 100 B-21s. Were you involved, was Stratcom involved in making the determination of the overall bomber requirements?
I was involved in the discussions.
Do you believe that 75 B-52s and 100 B-21s will be sufficient to conduct a nuclear deterrence mission while supporting conventional bomber missions as well?
I believe that's the minimum capability required.
Has the department begun planning for basing the B-1s? I'm sorry, the B-21s?
The B-21s, I know that the basing process is underway. I think that's an Air Force issue. That's something that they'll come to me, Stratcom, when they come to the Congress as well. But that's an Air Force issue that they have to work. But I know that process is underway because, well, I'm an Air Force officer, so I do stay in touch with my service.
Understand. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rounds. Senator Heinrich?
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, General Hyten. I want to say I appreciate that you have long expressed your frustration about our inability as both government and military to move more quickly in terms of acquisition as well as in terms of decision-making. And I certainly agree that we need to be more agile and responsive across the board. I think that applies to space systems, it applies to helicopters, it applies to our nuclear programs. Does it concern you that the NNSA conducted an analysis of alternatives on pit production that chose to ignore the Nuclear Weapons Council's previously endorsed plan to meet our nation's nuclear stockpile requirements, and that it also took 3 years for that analysis to move forward?
So it doesn't concern me that it conducted analysis of alternatives. I think that's a smart thing to do. But it does concern me that it took 3 years. I don't think any AOA should take 3 years. We take 3 years in the Department of Defense a lot, too. I don't know why that is, Senator. I don't know why we spend so much time. It used to be we could build something in 3 years. But now we like to study things for 3 years. But like I said earlier, Lisa Gordon-Haggerty, the new the administrator of NNSA, she called me day one and said, we're going to get you the answer. I don't have the answer yet on where we're going to go. As a member of the Nuclear Weapons Council and as the Stratcom commander, my job is to state the requirement. The requirement is 80 pits.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, the first element of that is 30 pits at Los Alamos.
Right.
That is regardless of whatever the AOA comes out. We've got to get to 30 pits at Los Al first.
Do you think it would have been appropriate and smart for them to at least have considered the pathway that was chosen a few years ago as a response to the fact that NNSA was not moving fast enough at the time?
So I think they're doing that in part of their engineering analysis now. I haven't seen the results of that yet. I'll see that shortly. I think Lisa Gordon-Haggerty is committed to this body to come back in the near future.
I've had some productive conversations with her. Can you talk a little bit about what any additional slip would mean in terms of our life extension programs?
I'm very concerned about any, because basically all the new weapons that we just talked about, Columbia, sea-launched ballistic missiles, which is Trident, the GBSD, the new ICBM, the LRSO, all of those require weapons. Plutonium pits that are 100 years old are not a good thing for this country. That's just, we don't know how to characterize that. We don't know the material interaction of all those pieces. We have to make sure that we have a modern, if we're going to be a nuclear nation, we have to have plutonium pit production. And so I'm concerned that we've now pushed that just like everything else, so everything will deliver just in time. Anytime we have something that delivers just in time, I get very nervous.
Well, I share your concern, and the NDAA, Mr. Chair, that was just signed into law actually requires the Nuclear Weapons Council to certify no later than May 11th of this year that NNSA's recommendations actually meets DoD requirements. So we have certainly got to get this thing back on track and get it on track quickly. I want to shift gears for just a minute to some of the developments around what was formerly called Operationally Responsive Space. It's now the Space Rapid Capabilities Office. It certainly received significant priority and resources in this year's budget request. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of responsive space in general and describe how the newly designated Space Rapid Capabilities Office will contribute to our nation's resilience in that domain?
So the key when you look at the budget, especially when you look at all the elements, including the classified side, is the beginning, finally, of building a resilient warfighting architecture for space. That's the path we're starting down to right now. The Space Rapid Capabilities Office will be a key piece of that because there will be certain elements that'll be small, resilient, that we need to go fast with. They'll be the perfect place to do that. We have to give them the authority and responsibility, the funding, and let them go do that. But like I talked about with Senator Nelson before, that's the good news. The challenge we have now is we haven't done it. We haven't done anything. It's sitting right there, and I think, Senator, you've been involved in that discussion with me for at least the better part of a decade.
Right.
And we've never quite got there. Everything is lined up now. It's right there. Everybody understands the need. The administration, the Congress, the department understand the need. We've put a budget in place that starts down that path. Now we have to do it.
I couldn't agree more. I think for the first time, we actually have that alignment, so let's take advantage of it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Heinrich. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and General Hyten, very good to see you. Thank you for your leadership of Strategic Command and for the men and women that serve with you in Stratcom. We thank them for their service as well. You have acknowledged over and over again today that space is becoming an increasingly contested and militarized domain. And while we continue to hold that technological advantage in space, our adversaries are rapidly catching up to us. They're modernizing and developing their own space capabilities. So I do appreciate your efforts to streamline the Air Force's space acquisition process, which has significantly hampered our ability to rapidly develop and deploy our critical capabilities. I do believe more needs to be done to ensure that U.S. can overmatch our near-peer competitors and adversaries in space. So the only way to solve a problem is to understand exactly what we're up against. And you've discussed what you can today in an open setting. But would you agree that the threats that we see in space are greater and more complex than they were in the year 2011?
Oh, significantly greater. And I think tomorrow you'll see in the closed hearing how all of that comes together. Because in the closed hearing, you'll see the budget played out into the future against the threats that are now coming out, and you'll understand the integration of all those pieces together. So, weather permitting, I sure hope we get together tomorrow so you can see that.
Absolutely. And given that the last national security space strategy was developed in 2011, do you believe it would be worthwhile for the DoD to develop a modernized strategy to face today's threats?
So if that's a yes or no question, what it sounded like, I'll say yes. But I'll tell you that the Air Force, the services, the National Reconnaissance Office, and my command have worked together to build what I think is an integrated strategy. The challenge with it is it's so classified we can share it with only a very few people. We'll be able to share it with you tomorrow. I think we're going to have to, the work we have to do is actually figure out what really needs to be classified in the future. How do we do that? Because we need to be able to plan with the other combatant commands, plan timing and tempo of our operations. All those pieces have to come together, and unless we have things that we can talk about in forums like this, it is a very difficult problem to do. So I think we have a very good strategy now. The problem is not that many people know it. So we're going to have to work that issue.
And I do appreciate that. You can see the level of concern that's coming from those of us on the Armed Services Committee here in the Senate. We do hear it from our public as well. While they might not have access to the same level of information, they do have a concern about it. So we look forward to getting that information. On to the nuclear posture review. The 2018 NPR stresses the importance of nuclear command, control, and communications, or NC3 modernization, promising upgrades, new technology, and better governance and planning across the commands. What are the greatest challenges to sustaining and modernizing the department's NC3 capabilities?
So the biggest challenge is the integration of all those new weapons platforms I was describing before. Our nuclear command and control today is secure and reliable, but it operates on the old weapon systems, the old platforms, the old structure. We talked about in 2030, the new submarine, the new bomber, the new ICBM, new capabilities are going to come online, and they're going to have to fit into a new nuclear command and control architecture. Now, we have not directly defined that for the Congress or for our nation yet, and we're going to have to do that. And if you think about 2030, it sounds like a long time away, but it's only 12 years. And so we really, this year, we have to make some critical decisions on governments. The chairman and the secretary are involved in that right now, and we have to get after defining what that issue is.
So you would characterize this as that we don't have sufficient and capable acquisition prepared.
So I would say that the nuclear command and control today is fine. We can talk about that in a classified form, but it's good. But we have to have an acquisition plan that delivers the nuclear command and control in 2030 that'll match all the weapon systems. And we have not matched that yet. The Air Force has done a good job in establishing the right structure. The Navy's done a good job establishing the right structure. But there's another element, which is the national piece, that is not as well defined yet, and how all those pieces are going to come together is probably the biggest question. So we understand the problem. We've clearly stated, understand what the problem is. Now we have to explain to ourselves and then to you the approach to get there in the future.
I appreciate that. My time has expired, but General, I do want to thank you again for your leadership in this area and appreciate the fact that you are very forward-thinking. We really do need that at such a critical time. So thank you to you and for the men and women that serve with you. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Hyten, for being here. General, we just passed a significant deadline for the New START Treaty, which requires both the United States and Russia to limit the number of deployed nuclear warheads and platforms. And according to the terms of the agreement, both Russia and the U.S. were required to certify by February 5th of this year that we have met those caps. General, are you confident, based on the verification mechanisms we have in place, that the Russians have lived up to their end of the agreement so far?
Again, yes or no question. The answer is yes. There's some caveats. There's still disagreements on both the Russian and American side about certain elements of their bomber force, our bomber force. But we certified on the 5th. They certified. We believe, given the current mechanisms, that we're in compliance.
All right, good. Thank you, General. You know, last year you told Senator Kaine that you continue to support the New START limits. And I understand that New START applies only to strategic weapons, not to the entire nuclear arsenal. And I share your concerns about Russian verification of the INF Treaty, that there's some areas where we have concerns. The nuclear posture review calls for 2 new low-yield warheads to be developed in our own nuclear arsenal. General, you said that you don't support increasing the number of strategic weapons. As part of developing these 2 new low-yield options, do you support increasing the overall size of the nuclear arsenal?
No, ma'am. So here's what we'll do, is that we'll take each of the sea-launched ballistic missiles, the Ohio-class submarines that we have. We will pull a missile out. We'll take the large warhead off. We'll put a small warhead on, put it back on the submarine, put it out to alert.
Okay.
So the total numbers of weapons that we have will be greater, which is kind of an interesting piece, is that we'll have the same number of weapons, lower total yield, and somehow that's creating a destabilizing structure, which
All
is
right.
an interesting dynamic.
Okay. Thank you, General. I appreciate the detail on this. And if I can, just one more question on this. New START expires in February of 2021. But the agreement includes an option for a 5-year extension. What conditions would you want to see in place for us to extend New START?
So that's a question for the State Department. Again, I'm not a diplomat. I'm not in the White House. My desire and what I present to the State Department and to my leadership in the White House is that if we can create conditions for stability across nuclear weapons across the board, that makes my job easier. My job is to defend the nation against nuclear threats, space threats, all the threats that we have. And knowing what our adversaries have and being able to verify that is hugely important. I'd like to be able to do that across the entire spectrum of capabilities, but the most critical is the strategic limits that are in the New START treaty.
Good. Well, I appreciate that, General. You know, I have no illusions about Vladimir Putin. I think he's a thug and a bully, and I think we'll continue to disagree with him more than we agree, including on nuclear issues. But Russia and the United States still control strategic nuclear arsenals capable of blowing up the world many times over. So if it's possible to continue to make progress and, as you say, more stability in this one area, then I think we need to continue to have that conversation. With my remaining time, I'd like to ask one other question and pick up on Senator Ernst's point and ask you about plans to modernize the Nuclear Command, Control, and Communication System, the NC3. Last month, Senator Reid and I visited Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts to meet with the Program Executive Office for NC3. We've got some really talented people up there doing critical work, but I'm worried because everyone I've talked to agrees that the Air Force Materiel Command, which is responsible for acquisition side of NC3 recapitalization, is understaffed for this mission. So can I just ask, General, will you commit to working with me and with this committee and with General Pawlikowski to advocate that NC3 is appropriately staffed so that it can move forward as it needs to?
I will commit to do that, Senator. If I could, just one
Please.
addition to that is that we actually have really good people assigned to that job right now. The problem really is that you can create the slots and put people in those slots, but this is such a complicated problem that it takes years to build the expertise that you have. So just because you get a smart person and put them in the chair, it doesn't mean you solve the problem. We actually have to get training for them and build that expertise up because we took our eye off that expertise and now we have to rebuild it.
Well, I understand that, and your point about we took our eye off this is absolutely spot on. The systems that comprise NC3 are aging, and they are far too critical to be left to chance. We need to make sure that this system is secure and that it's resilient, and we need the best acquisitions approach to it to make sure that we can get this done on time. And I hope we can continue to work together on that.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, General.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Senator
Mr. Chairman.
Warren. Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you for being here and for your decades of service and dedication. Well, one question I'd like to start with is, it was maybe an NDA or two ago that we had a discussion about retiring some of the outdated weapons in our arsenal. How are we doing with that? And is there anything more that we need to do for some of the outdated weapon systems, some that are just either outmoded or potentially dangerous?
So the stockpile, you're talking about the nuclear weapons here. The nuclear stockpile is secure, but as you said, a few years ago we started looking at some of the old weapons and slowly and surely starting removing those from the stockpile. In order to get to what we have actually done, we have to go to a classified forum. Yeah. But I think that's a smart thing to do because we need to make sure that the stockpile is there for two reasons: to support the fielded forces that we have, but to also support a potential, violation of the New START treaty or a breakout of that treaty, so that we have the ability to grow forward. I mean, the Minuteman missiles today, for example, only have one warhead on top of each of the missiles that we have deployed, but has the ability to put 3 on top. We need to have those extra weapons in case there's a problem with our adversaries in Russia or China, that we need those capabilities. So we have to make sure we maintain the stockpile at the right level, but we shouldn't maintain anything greater than that. So we've been making good progress in that.
The 2-year spending bill, how is that affecting, what kind of time horizon do we really need for you? You've got some long-term execution horizons for your work. The 2-year spending bill helps, but can you tell me specifically how that's, in an open setting, how that's been helpful to your command?
Well, we don't have the bill yet. That's the biggest concern I have. But assuming that we do, what will do for the first time is we'll have stability for 18 months. And stability is the most important thing. You know, all the things we talked.
18 months seems like a long time around here, but that's, it's amazing that you consider that positive, and we all know that's not enough time for your line of business.
The most important thing is a budget on the first of every year. That is the most important thing, whether that budget comes through a 2-year budget or an 18-month budget, but having a budget on the first of the year. And when I look back at the history and the folks that used to go fast, the Shrevers, the Rickovers, and the biggest thing, they always started with a full budget on the first of the year. And because of that, they had the ability to make decisions and flex accordingly. And when you don't, not only do you not go fast, but you actually waste huge amounts of money. And that's both of those things bug me.
So isn't it fair to say that, I know you don't want to give Congress advice, but if we come up short on these spending decisions, then some of the dates that you've talked about and some of the capabilities that will come online will also shift to the right?
And since I have almost no margin in some of those programs, that scares the ever-living heck out of me.
On the INF with Russia, the ideal world would be that Russia's actually complying. But if they don't, at what point is there sufficient level of compliance where even though they're cheating in certain areas, it's worth having? Or at what point do we have to say we've got to take the handcuffs off?
Well, you've seen in the budget for FY19, we've started or proposed starting research and development against the ground launch cruise missile. Research and development is not in violation of the treaty, but testing and deployment of that capability would be. But nonetheless, we've said it doesn't look like they're going to come back in compliance, so we're going to start down that path. President Putin yesterday said he didn't want an arms race. Of course, on the 1st of March, he showed nuking Florida. So I'm not sure exactly what the message is there, but I can tell you that if we have to build intermediate range missiles to respond to the threat, I have no doubt that this country knows how to do it. We've done it before. We can do it again. And we propose starting the research and development in 19 to start down that path.
Do you agree that if we don't take that threat seriously, that some who've testified before the committee, they put us in a position of, I think the phrase was used, we could be in a position of either surrender or suicide?
That's the Kissinger quote, and I agree with that. I think we need a low-yield nuclear weapon. Very small numbers. I can tell you how many we need in a classified session. It's not many, but I think we need that to deter our adversaries, to make sure we don't get into that point where the only decision for the president is suicide or surrender.
Well, thank you, General, and I, for one, will be doing everything I can to make sure that we provide you funding so that you can do your job the way I know you can do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Peters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Hyten, for being here today and for your testimony. And as always, thank you for your service as well. We've heard from several members here today questions related to the low-yield submarine-launched ballistic missile, as well as the nuclear-capable sea-launched cruise missile. So my question relates to the discrimination issue that some people have raised, that with these particular capabilities, an adversary may not be able to identify that a low-yield SLBM is actually a low-yield weapon that has been fired, and it could possibly trigger escalation, thinking something more is coming at them. In fiscal year 2007, the Navy considered a conventional Trident modification where Trident submarines would carry conventional warheads as well as nuclear warheads. And at the time, Congress rejected funding for that modification. Former Ted Stevens, former senator here, said, and I quote, "A country that picks up or identifies a launch might legitimately worry whether the weapon carries a nuclear or conventional payload. This could be a provocative action if taken," which was part of his comments in rejecting that idea. So my question to you is, with a low-yield warhead, isn't the discrimination problem still there? Is it more dangerous? What should we do about that?
So there's a million ways to go down that. It's a very complicated answer. I'll try to be brief. The first thing is that from detection to creation of the explosion is less than 30 minutes. It's a very short period of time. If somebody does detect that launch, they will see a single missile or maybe 2 missiles coming. They will realize it's not an existential threat to their country, and therefore they don't have to respond with an existential threat. That's what I would recommend if I saw that coming against the United States. But I think the first thing you have to realize is that, first of all, it's a deterrence weapon. The first use of that weapon is to make sure that nobody used that kind of weapon against us. The second piece is that if we do have to respond, we want to respond in kind and not further escalate the conflict out of control. And so an adversary, if Russia in this case, will see a weapon coming, perhaps. I can talk about that in the classified form as well. They'll see it coming, but they don't have to respond right now, and they won't have time to respond because they won't want to commit suicide. So all of those pieces, when you look at all the pieces coming together, actually, if you're talking about a rational actor, will not be an issue in terms of it. So deterrence weapon first, and then a response weapon like in kind to keep the conflict from escalating worse. It actually makes it harder for an adversary to use the weapon in the first place, and if it does use it, it allows you to respond appropriately.
Mm-hmm. The key is a rational actor.
Key is a rational actor. A rational actor is the basis of all deterrent policy.
Right, right. There's also been a number of questions related to NC3 systems that you have answered. My question is about the priorities. Where does modernizing NC3 fit in with the modernization efforts of our broader nuclear enterprise? It seems to me that it's essential that we have secure and reliable command and control in place prior to new weapons, but how would you balance those priorities?
So the way I've talked about it used to be the Big Four. Big Four were bomber, ICBM, cruise missile, submarine. It's now the Big Six: bomber, ICBM, cruise missile, submarine, plus NC3, plus nuclear weapons. Those 6 elements have to come together for our nuclear infrastructure and for our nuclear deterrent to continue to be viable in the future. All 6 of those have to come together in the 2030 timeframe for the future. They all come together today. We're fully ready today, but to make sure it comes together in the future, we have to be working all 6.
Simultaneously.
Simultaneously.
Earlier today, you testified that the sea-launched cruise missile is not a bargaining chip. But last month, Secretary Mattis testified at the House Armed Services Committee that the submarine-launched cruise missile will, and I quote him, give our negotiators something with which to negotiate. Could you clarify that for us, please?
Absolutely. I think the Secretary said it exactly right. I don't like calling anything a bargaining chip. That capability is against the threat. However, that capability also gives our negotiators something to talk about. If you don't have something to talk about, it's very hard to sit down and negotiate. But it's not a bargaining chip because it's to counter the threat. I think the only thing he didn't like and I don't like is using the term bargaining chip. But it does give our negotiators things to work with, which is a good thing.
Great. Thank you, General.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, General.
Sir.
Thank you for your service to the country as well.
Thank you, sir.
Russia's strategy to escalate to dominate is something this committee has heard about over the last 3 weeks several times. Senator Fisher mentioned it this morning. General Scaparrotti talked about it in my office when we met a few weeks ago as well. And to me, it's chilling to think that Vladimir Putin sees the preemptive opportunity as a real one in a way to cement the gains that he's making as he tries to grab more territory and, frankly, intimidate many of his neighbors. Eastern Ukraine comes to mind, as does the possibility of Russia seeking to build a land bridge through Lithuania to its enclave, Kaliningrad. I'm confident the administration will use all available resources, whether it's diplomatic, military, and economic means, to counter such a strategy if we find ourselves or our allies in need of assistance. What we've learned, though, is that Russia truly respects strength. I'm interested in what kind of strength we should have to put Russians' ambitions in check. In that vein, the recently completed nuclear posture review proposes returning 2 capabilities. You've already talked about them with Senator Peters, both the sea-launched ballistic missile as well as the cruise missile. My question for you is, do you have all that you need in order for us to develop a complete low-yield nuclear program or missiles?
So, first of all, as the commander of U.S. Strategic Command, I have everything I need today to deter Russia from doing anything against the United States of America. We're fully ready against any threat that exists today, without a doubt.
Very good.
What my concern is will that be the case for the commander after commander after commander after me as we go down looking in the future? And in that case, we have a lot of work to do in order to make sure that those capabilities come online. We believe that in order to deter Russia from using nuclear weapons on the battlefield, we should deploy a low-yield nuclear weapon on our ballistic missile submarines. We believe to respond to a number of threats, both in Russia and China, that we should have a sea-launched cruise missile capability in order to respond to that. We know how to do all of that stuff. It's not new. It is work that we have done before, both in the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. We know exactly how to do it. We just have to go do that work. But the most important thing, and I think Senator Reid said it earlier, the most important thing is the continuing modernization of the triad, because that is the foundation of our nation's defense, and that's the strength that will continue to deter Russia into the out years.
As you look at the potential of those who succeed you or come after you, will you, is congressional authorization as it relates to low-yield nuclear weapons, is it essential or not necessary?
So I've talked, it's really a question for lawyers, not for a combatant commander, but because it's so important to me, I talk to lawyers. And they have told me that congressional authorization is required. Therefore, the Nuclear Weapons Council and I have talked to the Office of Management and Budget. The Department of Energy is working with them. I think they'll have an approach to come look for authorization to begin that right away so we can start down that path. It's already in our 19 budget submission. It was not in the 19 Department of Energy budget submission. That's the Department of Energy piece that will require authorization, and I think that will come in a fairly timely way.
Senator Tillis mentioned it earlier, and you commented on it very clearly, but the continuing resolutions that have presented real hurdles for our military are measurable in real dollars. I met with the Secretary of the Navy, and he said that over the last several CRs, it's cost the Navy in quantifiable dollars about $9 billion. That to me seems astounding that we, as tight as things have been, and frankly, we're hopeful for the $165 billion that we're looking forward to being deployed to help our men and women in uniform. The fact of the matter is that short-term budgeting has got to be an obstacle that is preventable, number one. Number two, a major source of angst for folks in your position.
So that it's, I worried about it for a number of reasons. I can't even describe the impact on morale to the workforce, because when it happens, the message that is sent, I know it's unintentional because I talk to each and every member of Congress, and they all respect the military, but the message that is sent is they don't care, is that the Congress doesn't care, the nation doesn't care when they don't get a budget. When they have to come in, when the civilian employees have to sign a piece of paper and says, yep, I will go home, I'll do no work, it is so deflating to the workforce that it's hard to describe what the impact of that is. And then the inefficiencies that we put into the overall conduct of the B-21 program, the GBSD, any new program comes up that has a funding increase required that we can't do, we incorporate all kinds of inefficiencies into that process. And then, you know, I still don't have a problem today conducting my mission, but I really worry about the long-term impact for continuing to do that. And I know that if we don't get routine budgets, that the schedules now that deliver just in time won't deliver in time, because we won't have an efficient program delivering them. So I worry about that in a lot of ways. I know each of the members here do, but as a body, it's so essential that the Congress come together and pass a defense appropriations bill.
Thank you. Certainty and predictability are absolutely essential for the success of our military.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General, for being here. In your written testimony, General, you highlight the need to prioritize and accelerate development of hypersonic capabilities, and I could not agree more with you. Is the U.S. leading the way in development of hypersonic glide vehicles, or are we behind the curve relative to Russia and China?
So we're ahead in some areas, behind in other areas. So as a whole, I'd say it's a competition, and as a competition, I believe that we should have a goal of winning that competition, not tying, not losing, but winning the competition. So that means the areas we're behind in, and I can talk about those in a classified setting. The areas that head in, we should accelerate further. We need to make sure that that becomes a priority for our nation to understand what that is. And then we have to figure out how to respond to it. And the first way to respond to it is to be able to see the threat, which right now is challenging. So we have to build capabilities to see what the threat is as well.
Thank you.
In terms of that competition, as you look at Russia and China, is it that as we look forward, are we moving further ahead, or are they closing in on us in terms of capabilities?
They're closing in. I think we're still ahead. We're ahead significantly on the conventional side. I think we have stability with Russia on the nuclear side. We have advantage with China on the nuclear side. But they are gaining ground quickly, especially when you look at space and cyber.
The Navy successfully demonstrated a conventional prompt strike missile last year that could become a sea-based capability in the future. What are the next steps for the development of a sea-based CPS capability?
So the next step is, you've seen it in the budget, the Navy has been given the program now. The Navy has to decide who's going to lead the program. How's that? So there's a joint task force underway involving the Navy, the Joint Staff, my command, to look at the future of that program and to define it in 2019 so that we can execute the budget that we've put together. That work will be underway this summer, and we'll report out. Admiral Richardson, the CNO, is the lead on that. I talked to him about it the other day. He's committed to make sure that that comes across right, because Stratcom and other combatant commands have a valid need for that capability.
General, we have a new bomber, a new air-launched cruise missile, the life extension of our current ICBMs, a new ICBM, a new SSBN, warhead life extensions, and our nuclear command and control systems. The nuclear posture review adds to this potentially another warhead modification, a new submarine-launched cruise missile, any necessary modifications to the subs carrying the Stratcom, and any warhead modifications necessary to arm it. Can you give us a list from first to last of how you rank these? Because our concern is we do not have a budget that can accomplish even the portion that we all see as absolutely essential. And so we know there are things we need to do, and I was wondering if you have a list of how you put these in place.
I do not have one to enlist, Senator, and
is it that they're all critical? And
they are all critical. The most critical is the modernization of the triad, the big six that I talked about with Senator Peters a while ago. That is the most important piece of it. But everything in the nuclear posture review that we talk about, everything that's in the budget is in response to a threat. So I can't sit in front of the Senate. I can't sit in front of Congress. I can't sit in front of the President and say, yes, sir, because of that threat, we don't need this capability. Because the threat exists. The only way I can change my recommendations to you is if we can change the threat. And I hope someday that threat changes. I hope it changes in Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. I hope those threats change. But if they don't change, I will sit in front of you next year and advocate for those capabilities because they're all in response to an existing threat to this nation.
In light of how critical all of those are and the budget challenges that we have as well, now more than ever we need to be sharing information, services, and parts across the services to control cost and risk in this undertaking. Can I secure your commitment to find commonality between the services and industry to try to reduce that cost and risk, that we're not reinventing the wheel, in effect?
So I'm a combatant commander, so I need the capability. However, I'm also a taxpayer. So I look for any way we can, that we can come up with commonality. And I think there are ways to do that. But I'll also point out that we have to be careful not to create single-point failures in the nuclear enterprise. And so if we have everything common on the ICBM side and the SLBM side, that's actually not a good thing. Because now if one thing fails, we've lost two legs of the triad. So we have to be careful as we walk through that. But I'm working with Strategic Systems Program and Admiral Benedict and Admiral Richardson to try to figure out with the Air Force where elements of commonality should be. And we have an effort going on inside the Nuclear Weapons Council to define the strategy for modernization in the future so we understand what those pieces are.
General, thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Donnelly. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, General Hyten. I appreciate your being here today and your great service. I was looking in your written testimony because I saw a phrase that interested me, and now I can't find it, but
I'm sure it was brilliant.
It was brilliant. It said, there's no cyber war, there's no space war, there's just war.
That's correct. And it's one of my few things I get frustrated about is when I get a question is how are you going to fight and win a war in space? How are you going to fight and win a war in cyberspace? And it occurred to me a couple of years ago, there is no such thing.
Yeah.
There's just war. In war, there may be an element of it that extends into space. There may be an element that extends into, but war is against an adversary. And so if you have to deal with the adversary, and if we get attacked in space, for example, is the United States response going to be a response in kind in space? In many cases, that might be the exact wrong response. We may want to respond in another domain.
But we ought to respond.
But it should be focused on the adversary and what the adversary holds dear. And if we hold space dear, maybe we'll respond in some way that holds something else the adversary holds dear. There's just war, there's just conflict.
General, on page 3, you go over in your testimony global security environment, and you have this phrase in your paragraph about Russia. In June 2017, as part of an effort to destabilize Ukraine, the Russian military launched the most destructive and costly ever cyber attack in history. The effects of this attack spread globally and included devastating damage to U.S. businesses. Is that war?
I believe it is. I believe that war is that extends into cyberspace. I believe that our adversaries have figured out that that's part of the structure. War is against a nation, against a nation state, and you attack the thing a nation state holds dear. And certainly I would hope that everybody in America holds our economic structure dear, it holds our ability to live comfortably dear, it holds our power grids dear, all those kind of things that can be attacked through cyberspace. And
should we hold our election systems as dear as we hold our economic
I believe
capacity?
That any attack against our nation should be considered an attack that we have to respond to. And
including the Russian attack of 2016 against the election, the U.S. election.
I actually have talked to Admiral Rogers. I understand. I believe it was, but I don't know exactly the relationship inside Russia about how that happened. All those kind of pieces are still to be worked.
If it was attributed to the Russian government rather than just rogue elements, is it an act of war? We're not talking about cyber war. Space war is an act of war.
So it's the job of the United States Congress to declare war.
What if somebody takes action against us? We haven't declared war on Russia. We hadn't in 2016, but when they took that action against the Ukraine, which you said was an act of war, I just asked you about that, because it affected a sovereign nation, the attack of a sovereign nation, another sovereign nation. How about, I agree we hadn't declared war on Russia, but was Russia's effort to undermine the American electoral system, if it can be shown that it was with governmental imprimatur rather than rogue elements, would that be an act of war?
So by definition, it would be an act of war by definition, but would we declare war? I would think not. I would think, however, that the United States would want to respond in some way to an attack on our nation.
So it would be an act of war by the Russians against us. Obviously, the administration, Congress has the ability to decide what to do. I think that's important. We had a hearing with Cyber Command, very strong hearing with Admiral Rogers a couple weeks back, and we're grappling with this. One of the worries that I think we have with broad portfolio, not only in armed services, but we serve on other committees. We're dealing with the American election system. We're dealing with the power grid. We're dealing with all kinds of things. Is how do we protect the country? Admiral Rogers said, well, the protection of the election system really is more about states-run elections.
Yep.
And Secretary McCaskill said, well, you can't expect the Secretary of State of Missouri to go head-to-head against the nation state of Russia if they want to attack the American election. So we are depending upon our defense, DHS, and others to protect us. But we also have to be clear, because if we're unclear what it is, then we will likely be unclear what our response should be.
I think that's the challenge we have in cyberspace today. So I've given you my best military advice, my personal opinion, but as a nation, we haven't made that decision yet.
Well, I would just say, you call it out pretty clearly about what an attack on Ukraine is. I looked in that paragraph to see any reference to Russian attacks directly against the United States, and I didn't see any. The one I saw was an attack against the Ukraine in June of 27 that affected American businesses. When I asked you about it, you said you thought that kind of attack of nation against nation vis-a-vis Ukraine was an act of war. And I agree, we have to decide how seriously we'll treat it. But some, on our side, there's been some ambiguity about it, and I will say on the side of both of the last administration and this administration, there's real ambiguity. I don't know of a mayor or governor who believes that the federal government is really going to have their back to protect their electoral system in 2018. They haven't seen the signal sent that we're going to have their back. And I think it's something we should send. Mr. Chair, I'm over my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, welcome. Thank you for your service. Good to see you again.
Sir.
In your written testimony, you stated that, quote, "We cannot be successful in this endeavor by investing solely in active missile defense capabilities. We must strengthen and integrate all pillars of missile defense, including the capability to defeat adversary missiles before they launch." Building on this point, as you know, currently America's missile defense systems are limited to ones that intercept missiles during the mid-course, when the missile is coasting in outer space, and in the terminal phase, once it's entered back into the atmosphere. But the Missile Defense Agency has noted, quote, "Intercepting a missile in its boost phase is the ideal solution for a ballistic missile defense, since destroying a missile during this phase of its flight precludes the deployments of any countermeasures and also prevents the missile warhead from attaining the velocity necessary to reach its intended target. As you know, the greatest challenge in targeting during boost phase is that a missile is only in boost phase for a very few short minutes at the beginning of the flight. This requires sensors that are able to quickly detect a missile launch and relay targeting information. A study conducted by the Hudson Institute and a senior review group comprised of 2 former Missile Defense Agency directors, 2 former NORTHCOM commanders, the former Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, among others, stated that, quote, "An SBI capability would dramatically augment U.S. terrestrially and sea-based defensive capabilities, reduce the demand on current systems, and provide the United States with the optimal vantage point for destroying enemy missiles, regardless of their launch or target location, whether on land, at sea, in the air, or in space." Given the metastasizing nuclear threat from North Korea, given Iran's relentless pursuit of nuclear weapons, the growing development of anti-access area denial capabilities in the Persian Gulf and the South China Sea, and great power competition in space, the case for urgently pursuing a space-based intercept capability has never been stronger. Recent investments from China and Russia in missile technology, like hypersonic glide vehicles that circumvent our current missile defense architecture, further underscore the potential value of a space-based layer for the boost phase. General, understanding that the MDR is forthcoming, can you share some of your views on the path forward for developing the architecture necessary to make boost phase defense a reality?
So as the commander of Stratcom, I've been on the record as supporting the requirement for boost phase intercept for the entire time I've been in command, and I've supported that for many years now. I would love to drop a missile back on somebody's head that launched it. It's really that simple. I think there are multiple ways to do that. I think the most important piece of the puzzle that you described is the sensor architecture that you need in order to target it. I'm a huge supporter of building space-based sensor elements to be able to target against all of those capabilities, as well as hypersonic capabilities, other capabilities in the boost phase to get after a number of those issues. The actual technical solution, I'm agnostic for. I've worked, in my past, I've worked space-based interceptor solutions and space-based sensor solutions. I'm convinced that space-based sensors are absolutely required. I'm not convinced at this time that space-based interceptors are required, but the requirement is there. I will advocate for that requirement. I think there's technologies that we can talk about in a classified session that can meet that. I think space is an element of that overall architecture, but the most important thing is the requirement for boost phase and left of launch, and I think the Missile Defense Review will talk about that in more detail.
What specifically is required? What's needed to get this accomplished, to make boost phase intercept a reality?
So I think that the department has to decide to integrate the number of different programs that are out there and come up with a point. I think the leadership in the department right now is the perfect leadership to do that. I know Dr. Mike Griffin. I know that he's looked at that technology in the past. He's only been in office now a few weeks, but that's been important to him for a long time. I think Secretary Lord, Secretary Shanahan, I think the Secretary of Defense support the boost phase construct. So I think what we're going to have to do this year is we're going to have to align all of the elements that are out there and make sure we realize it's not just the interceptor. It's coming up with the entire approach to dealing with boost phase intercept and get after that. And like I said, I think the Missile Defense Review will get to it in much more detail.
So what can or should this committee do?
I think the key is look at the Missile Defense Review. The Missile Defense Review will describe the approach of the nation and the department and how to do that. And then we'll have a discussion about, okay, what's good, what's bad, where do you disagree, and we'll have that discussion as we go through the year. But we really need the Missile Defense Review to start that discussion.
Very good. Thank you, General.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Talking about the boost phase intercept, you think this technology is doable and feasible and should be pursued?
Senator, I think the technology is actually pretty straightforward. I think the policy discussions are much more complicated because in order to attack a missile in the boost phase, you have to commit to dropping something on adversary territory. Now, if we're in the middle of a war or middle of a conflict, then that's really not a complicated decision. But if we're not, and we want to make that decision, that's a very complicated policy discussion. And we haven't had a lot of discussion about the policy impacts of making a decision like that. But from a technical perspective, I think the technology is there.
Thank you, General. I have a question about helicopters. This issue is one that you and I have discussed.
Yes, sir.
In fact, a year ago, as you may recall, I asked you about your frustrations with the Huey replacement program, and you said, and I'm quoting, "Of all the things in my portfolio, I can't even describe how upset I get about the helicopter replacement program. It's a helicopter, for gosh sakes. We ought to be able to go out and buy a helicopter and put it in the hands of the people that need it, and we should be able to do that quickly. We've been building combat helicopters for a long time in this country. I don't understand why the heck it is so hard to buy a helicopter." Do you still have the same frustrations with the Air Force continued delays in fielding a replacement helicopter?
I had a feeling somebody's going to quote me on that today, and I had a feeling it was going to be you. I've been working to try to get a helicopter in the hands of the folks in the missile fields for over a decade, and that's where my frustration comes from. And so that frustration won't go away until the helicopter's in the hands of the people. But the good news is the leadership, Dr. Roper, Dr. Griffin, Ms. Lord, Secretary Shanahan, they've taken it very seriously. We're in the middle of a source selection now. I hope contract award isn't imminent. There's a protest going on inside the source selection, which limits how much I can talk about it. But the leadership of the Air Force, the leadership of the department has taken it very seriously. And we're in the middle of a source selection now, which is a good thing. So we just—
Can you give us a date when you think it will be done?
I can't give you a date because of the protest that's in right now. That's the piece that's still frustrating me. I would like to sit in front of you and give you a date saying, here's where it's going to be. The good news is that my Air Component Commander, General Robin Rand, has put a number of adjustments into the Huey force in terms of fuel, in terms of armament, in terms of arms, to allow them to do the job until that helicopter comes into being. So the operational risk that I was concerned about significantly last year has really been eliminated in the near term. But I don't have a date where I can tell you, Senator, and I wish I did.
But that's still a concern that this aircraft, even with that short-term measure, still is incapable of meeting requirements to protect our ICBM fleet, correct?
Well, especially the movement of nuclear weapons. That's the key. But no, I can tell you in the classified session what we've done in terms of arming, in terms of fueling, to allow us to adequately protect the weapons. And so I'm comfortable with that protection system that's in there right now. But the Huey is still ancient, and it's got to be replaced. It's got to be replaced, and the sooner we can replace it, the better. So I'll continue to be demanding of my Air Force to deliver that capability, and I can tell you the Chief, the Secretary, and the acquisition leadership have all committed to getting there as fast as we can. I hope that contract award is soon.
I'm concerned about the triad and American naval superiority. I attended the commissioning of the USS Colorado over the past weekend, proud moment, as all these commissionings and christenings are, and our undersea superiority is more important than ever for all the reasons that you've outlined so well in your testimony. I'm concerned about the ramping up, which I think has to come in the construction of both the Ohio-class replacement, the Columbia, and the Virginia-class, which requires the defense industrial base to be strong, worker training and worker skills. Would you agree that the worker training grants that are provided by the federal government play an important role in our national strategic superiority? That industrial base has to be trained, and the federal government has a role in funding it.
The shipyards are a critical national asset to America. It's one of our strengths, and that workforce is essential to us being able to build Columbia, to be able to build Virginia. And I think it's the responsibility of all of us, including the federal government, to make sure that that workforce, which is a strategic asset, is supported across the board.
And when people talk about
no one else is here, right?
spending on our military security and our military budget, really our national security depends on that defense industrial base, as you've just said.
Every worker that's at a shipyard that is built working on the Columbia is part of our national security infrastructure.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Blumenthal, and thank you very much, General Hyten, for your patience and your straightforward answers. We appreciate you very much. With that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.